French authorities have confirmed that Notre Dame's two iconic front towers are saved after a huge fire broke out in the historical cathedral. The fire is cooling down, however, 2/3 of the roof was destroyed, including its delicate spire, which had collapsed earlier in the evening. Around 400 firefighters are currently trying to contain the blaze that reportedly started around 6 p.m. local time. The cause of the fire has not yet been clarified, but police launched an investigation. President Emmanuel Macron and his wife visited the site and talked with firefighters. He addressed the devastated crowd and ensured the Notre Dame will be rebuilt.
So I say this very solemnly to you tonight. We will rebuild this cathedral all together, and it is undoubtedly part of the French destiny and the project we will have for the coming years. But I am committed to it. Starting tomorrow, a national subscription will be launched and will beyond our borders. We will appeal to the greatest talents, and there are many who will come to contribute and rebuild us. We will rebuild Notre Dame, because that's what the French expect, and because it is what our history deserves, and because it's our deep destiny. Thank you.
And thousands watched in horror from nearby bridges and river banks how the fire destroyed the 850-year-old Persian landmark.
Around 6 p.m., we smelled flames. We were in the middle of serving people. I went outside and we were all shocked. It just went up in flames in the time that the firefighters took to get here, which is normal. They closed off the area. A security zone was created. It was enormous. And what's more, there was a lot of wind. The wind and the fire were changing direction all the time. Then we saw the roof collapse. We also saw it on the news. We are shocked. It's 850 years of history. It really hurts. We're sad.
Representatives of the so-called Lima Group met on Monday in Santiago, Chile. They reportedly followed up on the topics discussed in their last meeting held in Bogotá, with particular emphasis on the situation in Venezuela. As the prospect of U.S. military intervention in the region continues to weigh heavily on the bloc. And before this meeting, the government of Canada announced new economic sanctions against the Venezuelan government. According to a statement by the Canadian Foreign Minister, 43 people they consider to be close to President Maduro have been sanctioned. The statement did not provide the names of those sanctioned, but mentioned they were high-ranking officials and regional governors. Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland took part in the Lima Group's meeting in Chile. Our correspondent in Santiago, Tiare Valenzuela, has more on that meeting.
The latest meeting of the Lima Group took place in this hotel in Santiago. 13 representatives plus an envoy sent by the self-proclaimed interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaidó, took part in the meeting. Early in the morning, they arrived to the presidential palace to meet the Chilean president, Sebastián Piñera. This latest meeting was called for with more urgency than before, since in previous meetings the group has been unable to reach any agreement about the situation in Venezuela. This meeting also takes place soon after the U.S. Secretary Mike Pompeo toured a number of Latin American countries, including Chile. During his visit, Pompeo met with the President Piñera, the Foreign Minister, and a group of Chilean business people. Social movements have strongly rejected Pompeo's visit, saying that the U.S. may be the one who called for this Lima Group meeting.
We thank Tiare for that report. Venezuelan citizens gathered at the Simón Bolívar Bridge on Sunday to protest against the U.S. Secretary of State's visit to the Colombian border. Pompeo visited the border city of Cúcuta, where he met with Colombian President Iván Duque and once again took aim at the Venezuelan government. Citizens say Pompeo's presence is part of U.S. interventionism in Venezuela. Among those gathered at the bridge was Freddy Bernal, the commander of the Bolivarian militias in the state of Táchira. He called on citizens to continue defending their country's independence and sovereignty.
Regardless of anything else, Colombia is a US colony, and as such, the US can do whatever they want there. But here, once you cross the border, it's a different story. This is the land of Simón Bolívar, of Zamora, Chavez, and Nicolas. This is the land of people who demand respect. Therefore, in this land, the US does not rule. In this land, we are sovereign and independent.
China has responded to remarks made by Pompeo during his visit to Latin America, calling them blatant lies. The spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry, Lu Kang, said his government objects to the U.S. constantly slandering China-Latin America relations.
We have noticed some false accusations made by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo against China on the Venezuelan issue. I would like to say that China's position on Venezuela is clear, as well as consistent. We are safeguarding the purpose and principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as regional peace and stability. It should be pointed out that for some time, some US politicians have been carrying the same script of slandering China all over the world, fanning the flames and sowing discord everywhere. Their words and deeds are despicable, but lies are lies. Even if you say it 1,000 times, they are still lies. Mr. Pompeo, you can stop.
We are now joined live by Miguel Figueroa. He's the former leader of the Communist Party of Canada. He's currently in Venezuela on a peace delegation. Hello, Miguel. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us what you're doing in Caracas and what exactly is the mission of this peace delegation?
Well, we've been here for about a week. I've been here in Caracas for about a week. The purpose, of course, is to express solidarity with Venezuela and its people in the face of this massive onslaught by the United States and the NATO powers, the European powers, and of course by Canada as well. And this is an issue that, of course, we in Canada take particular concern about, because there are millions of Canadians that disagree with our support for this regime change operation, which emanating from Washington. And we're angry with the fact that the Global Affairs Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, is playing a leading role. She is in the front ranks of this assault. And so this is stimulating the solidarity movement across Canada. We came here to, of course, learn the latest developments, but we didn't come here to be convinced. We know what is happening. We know who's on the side of upholding the principles of international law, of supporting working people and indigenous people and the rights of women and so on. We know who's on the side of peace, and we know very clearly who is on the side of war and aggression. So from that point of view, the mission was very successful, and what's of course important now is what we do when we get back to our home countries.
Miguel, what is your analysis of the current political situation in Venezuela?
Well, it's certainly clear to us. This is my second visit in a month. I was here in March as well as part of the Canada-US peace delegation. It's quite clear to us that the maneuver to bring about a very quick regime change or coup d'etat by the United States and its allies has been an abject failure. It has backfired, and in fact there's more support now for the government of President Nicolas Maduro than there probably was even previously. People are indignant about how transparent this maneuver is, how much of a puppet Juan Guaido is of U.S. imperialism. And they're angry about it, and they see the need to uphold the sovereignty and the independence of Venezuela. It's not an issue about whether or not they might have criticisms or they have problems. Obviously, there are difficulties in the economy and people are struggling. That is certainly true. But they understand that what is at stake, really, is the long-term independence and the dignity of the Venezuelan people. And from that point of view, this operation has been a failure. Of course, there's still the danger of direct military aggression. And all of the peace forces around the world need to dig in to ensure that that does not happen, to ensure that Venezuela is able to proceed to rebuild and whatnot. But of course that means that the economic war against Venezuela as well, all of these sanctions that are being imposed to try to strangle the economy and to impose more hardships on the Venezuelan people, they must end as well.
Miguel, that's exactly what I was going to ask you next. What about Canada's new sanctions on Venezuela?
Well, I've been here for a week. I haven't had an opportunity to read in detail the latest sanctions, but it's worth noting that, in fact, in many respects, the sanctions that Canada has imposed have been even more severe than those imposed from Washington. So I imagine that this is a further extension of the sanctioning of individuals and so on. It gives the impression that they are targeting these sanctions at only those who are part of the government and the state apparatus. The reality is, however, that these sanctions always permeate throughout the economy and impose difficulties on the entire population. So we're against all of these sanctions. It is in fact a form of economic war, and it is illegal under the UN Charter, under the OAS Charter, and under the principles of international law. This, so far as we're concerned, this is really the fundamental issue here. It is not what happened or what didn't happen in May of 2018. It's not a question about is there a humanitarian crisis or isn't there a humanitarian crisis. There is a mountain of lies that's being spewed from Washington, from its think tanks and so on, and from Ottawa and from Toronto as well. And we need to respond to all of those. But underneath it all is a very fundamental question. Do the people of Venezuela have a right to their independence and their self-determination, or is it acceptable that a big power can impose itself as a bully, can self-declare that all of Latin America, all of the peoples of this continent are part of its backyard or not? And when it's placed that way, people start to understand very clearly what is taking place, and they increasingly are moving to oppose these policies, this aggression from Washington, from Ottawa, from Europe, and so on.
Miguel, we thank you so much for your time for Telesur English. We have been speaking with Miguel Figueroa. He's the former leader of the Communist Party of Canada. Let's take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. Social organizations in Chile have protested outside the Ecuadorian embassy in the capital to reject the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's arrest last week. The demonstrators described the detention as an attack on freedom of expression by the Ecuadorian and the British government. Assange was arrested after his asylum status was revoked by Ecuador's President Lenín Moreno. He was living in the embassy since 2012.
We believe this arrest is putting Assange's life in danger. Ecuador didn't want him to continue living in the embassy in London with an asylum status, and the reason they gave was that he didn't behave well. But we all know that his arrest has to do with all the information WikiLeaks has released regarding all the illegal activities carried by the CIA and the government of the United States.
A 7-month-old baby was killed in the department of La Guajira in Colombia after an attack against his father, a former FARC member. Our correspondent José Manuel Jiménez has more.
A 7-month-old baby died on his way to the hospital following an attack near the Simón Trinidad Vereda Tierra Grata territory. This is an area where former FARC members live and are prepared to be reintegrated back into society. The toddler was the son of former FARC combatant Carlos Enrique González, who was also seriously injured and remains hospitalized. His wife was also hurt in the attack. The head of the National Agency of Reincorporation denounced the ambush, which led to the child's death. He said the events are being investigated by the prosecutor's office, adding that there needs to be patience and steps to implement peace are carried out. The FARC group has also rejected the assault. In recent times, roughly 100 former FARC members and their families have been killed, and the government has failed to guarantee their protection. At least 50 social movement leaders have also been killed across the country for the year to date. Human rights organizations have said that in spite of the peace agreement, which was signed in 2016, at least 500 indigenous leaders have been murdered. In light of this, 3,000 social leaders from around Colombia will gather in Bogota from April 18th to May 3rd to call on the government to guarantee their safety and implement peace treaties.
We thank Jose Manuel Jimenez for that report. 135 Colombian women have been violently killed in January and February 2019, according to the Colombian National Legal Medicine Institute. The institute also said that 56% of those cases were perpetrated with firearms. However, the public prosecutor has only reported 48 femicides in the first 3 months of the year. Both authorities agree most of the cases were reported in the Department of Valle del Cauca and Antioquia. The latest UN report about women's rights in the country said Colombia created a solid law framed to protect women, but there is still a way to go to correctly apply them. The death toll in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil has risen to 10 after 2 buildings collapsed on Friday. Rescue workers are continuing the search for survivors. However, it's been difficult as flash floods and heavy rains hit the area. Rescue workers hope they may still find survivors due to the air pockets that might have formed under the rubble. The 2 collapsed buildings were constructed illegally, and it is unclear how many people lived in them. There has been an increase in the number of people denied visas by the U.S. consulate in Mexico. Lawyers representing some migrants said consular officers are denying visas even though applicants fulfill all financial and legal requirements. This as an amendment to the U.S. State Department's Foreign Affairs Manual, broadening the grounds for applicants to be considered public charges.
At times I want to think that everything will be okay and I'll be able to be with my family again, because it's very difficult to think that I won't be able to return to watch my children grow up, where their life is, where they have their friends. They don't know anything here.
Roughly 2,000 Central American migrants began making their way towards the U.S. border from southern Mexico on Monday. The caravan, which mainly includes women and children, left the state of Chiapas walking next to the Tapachula-Huehuetlán highway. Several migrant caravans have tried to reach the U.S. Since October 2018, despite threats by U.S. President Donald Trump.
We don't have another option but to migrate. We don't have another option. And if Trump is not happy, well then, but we don't have another option but to do that, because in our countries we don't have any support. We see that on this side. It's better so everyone heads this way. We think that Trump's heart will have to soften, because we have needs in our countries. For our families, we don't come here because we felt like it one day. We come because we have needs. We left family.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event?
Se despliega el tablero.
Uncritical Moves investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. More than 800 people have died due to the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, as the World Health Organization decided not to declare it as a global health emergency. The WHO said the Ebola outbreak, which has been ongoing since August, has not spread beyond the DRC, and therefore there's no benefit to declaring it an emergency. The statement made on Friday marks the second time the WHO has decided against declaring Ebola in the DRC an emergency. Our correspondent Oscar Ipildi brings us the latest details about the outbreak.
Sadly, the Ebola epidemic has worsened over the last few days. Health officials in the DRC confirmed 40 new cases recently. Today's report is not available yet, but it is evident that the epidemic is spreading faster. There is a growing amount of so-called community deaths, where people with Ebola avoid going to health centers to get treated because they are afraid they will be quarantined. By doing this, they remain in their communities, spreading the disease and finally dying there. And distrust in the Ebola treatment centers. Last Friday, the Emergency Committee of the World Health Organization held a meeting with the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo about the situation. However, they decided not to designate this outbreak as an emergency of international importance, and therefore, the borders of the DRC will not be closed. However, the committee did urge neighboring countries to increase their readiness to face the outbreak. Until now, no cases have spread outside of the territories of Beni and Butembo, inside the DRC. Therefore, health authorities hope they will be able to contain the epidemic soon. But some factors reportedly hinder their efforts, such as armed groups working in the region and a lack of communication between communities. One of the main fears is that the virus will spread to the city of Goma or neighboring countries like Rwanda. This would mean the epidemic would become an international emergency and it would be much harder to control.
The Military Council in Sudan has met with political parties and announced that the former ruling party will not be participating in the new interim government. The former President Omar al-Bashir's National Congress Party has been sidelined. The Military Council urged political groups to agree on an independent figure to be the next prime minister. The council also announced a new intelligence service chief. Reforms of the intelligence service were a key demand of protesters who continue to call for a civilian transitional government. Meanwhile, the country's largest opposition group, the Sudanese Professionals Association, has called for the formation of what they call a civil council. According to them, a civil council would assure the public that the revolution will not be hijacked by the military and members of the former regime. They added that while the military should be allowed to have representation on the council, it must be led by a civilian.
There is this one demand, which is one of the main demands of the protest movement, which is the formation of a sovereign civilian council with military representations to protect the revolution and to guarantee the demands are met. Our second demand is the creation of a civilian government made up of cadres and its tasks to be agreed upon with full executive powers.
Algerian police have detained dozens of protesters who have vowed to continue rallying against the interim government. Revolutionary demonstrators want a full transition from the government of Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Protesters say that the leaders of the interim government can't guarantee that the July 4th elections will be free and fair. Police used tear gas and water cannons to repress the citizens in the streets, who responded by throwing stones. Meanwhile, journalists in Algeria staged a protest against media censorship. State-owned EPTV journalists have called on the government to allow them to be objective and provide complete information.
It's the right of the people to make their voices heard through television. This TV company is the only one that belongs to the people. Why? Because 1% of the gas bill the citizen pays goes to the TV company, so citizens have a say.
The figurehead of 5 channels is the news. Today, news does not translate the popular demands of Algerians. which are no longer only expressed every Friday, they are expressed throughout the week.
With less than a month before South Africans go to the polls, the country has continued to experience violent protests by angry citizens demanding improved access to services. The protesters are accusing elected officials from both the ruling and opposition parties of turning a deaf ear to their complaints. Despite the progress that has been made in the last 2 decades, millions of South Africans still live in informal settlements that lack basic services such as water and electricity. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get your body. Tuesdays, only on Telesur. Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your green zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.